1996, author David Foster Wallace released his magnum opus, Infinite Jest. It was praised as a masterpiece, a postmodern deconstruction of the American novel. Unfortunately, it's really not very good. The book everyone swears they'll get to one day, that they've been preached at by literary nerds for years. Well, now that day has come. Join me, Jesse Draham, on a begrudging book club of my least favorite novel on the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast.
Episode 2, Steve Clark. Okay, here we are, episode 2 of the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast, and here we are with guest number 2, Mr. Steve Clark. How are you doing, Steve?
Hey, I'm great. It's really exciting to be talking about this book again. So
Yeah,
I'm excited to be here.
nice. Well, let's start right off. Tell us who you are, what your thing is, if you have anything to promote. I know that's a weird thing to ask in these times when, live anything is kind of kiboshed, but just tell us who you are. Tell us how you got into the book. What do you love about it?
Yeah, so I don't really have anything to promote, but I'll start out by saying I've read this book 3 times now.
Oh wow! Okay.
And humble brag. And I first read it my first year out of college, and I gotta say that like something about postmodernism in general jumped out at me, and I really liked it. And I just became like a David Foster Wallace fanboy, like the kind on the last episode that Daniel Ostroff said he does not like. I think I was definitely there. I read all his stuff. I read his biography. I read some criticism. And I've kind of moved on to a point now where I can see how kind of silly that is. But yes, but I love the book. It's my favorite book ever. I get that it's funny because you say everyone likes it. I think my impression is everyone hates it. Not everyone, but there's a lot of people who hate on it. And it seems like it's become a thing nowadays to hate on it.
Well, we're saying different types of everyone, just because I would say in like our modern peer group as guys, I don't know what you are, but I'm, early 30s. I first tried reading this in my early 20s. I think as far as our peer group, I don't know, I feel like it's almost changed a little bit because it started out, I feel like people treated it like the big masterful tome that like everybody has to read, but a lot of people don't get around to. But I think now there's been enough backlash against it. I'd like to be a little hipster and say I was backlashing against it before it was cool. But you hear like David Foster Wallace fans get a little bit of hate now. Like I mentioned in the first episode, a big part of the reason I ended up with the girlfriend I'm with right now is she had right there in like her online dating profile, like, do not tell me to read this fucking book, please.
It's funny you say that because I dated a girl who did some stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Nigerian girl. And I only say that because...
you date black girls, aren't you the best?
No, but one of her, yes, I am. But also one of her, aren't I progressive? But one of her first comments to me, I had a quote from David Foster Wallace in my Tinder profile, just to tell you the kind of obnoxious that I am or that I can be. And she said, I've always wanted to read Infinite Jest. And I like took the bait. I was like, oh my God, really? And she said, yeah, so I could have something to talk about with my future douchebag white boyfriend.
Wow.
It's a great, just like, I thought she was super into it. And she just like took the wind out of me. It was a great joke.
So I can only assume you two are married now and have several children.
We're still friends. Like we're still friendly. It was just a really funny, like, I get it. I'm going to take this quote out of my profile now kind of thing.
But when I said before the everyone thing, again, I don't think I would have beef with this book so much if it was just like a little culty book that like, some people liked. But it was I was astonished that like it got rave reviews when it came out. And again, a lot of my issue with this book is really just my bafflement that I don't understand what you're getting out of it, buddy. Which would be whatever, but it seems like a lot of, like, you know, in literary circles, it's considered like a masterful reworking of the American novel, and that's why we're doing this whole podcast, to just figure out, like, what the fuck am I missing?
Yeah, so I want to talk about a couple things. One of them is the plot, because I think and I think we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring up a couple things, if that's all right. Before we kind of jump into the. So there's this book by a really great author named Don DeLillo. You ever read any Don DeLillo?
I have not.
So he's really interesting, really unique. But he has a book called Underworld, and he has another book called White Noise.
Mm-hmm.
That in the book White Noise, there's this barn called the most photographed barn in America. And he goes to visit it. There's a professor who goes to visit it with a cultural critic. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how no one actually sees the barn, and how they're just seeing this image of a barn, or this idea of a barn, that they're going there because it doesn't have any outstanding traits. The only trait that it has is that other people have seen it and taken pictures of it. Mm-hmm. And so, like, no one can see the actual barn. They just have this image in their head. And I kind of think something similar is true of Infinite Jest. I think, like, it's hard to come to it without prejudice. You know, it's hard to come to it without a preconception. Mm-hmm. And I can totally understand having these moments where you're like, Jesus Christ, just shut up, DFW. Like, he goes on and on describing, like, you know, the outside of Enfield, of the drug treatment center.
He goes in deep in the section. By the way, we're going to be doing pages 33 to 60 this week for y'all reading along at home. That'll be there in the title. But yeah, there's a good couple pages that are just describing the ventilation system at Enfield Tennis Academy.
Yeah, I thought that, and it's more, so in that chapter, there's a little bit more. We'll get into that.
Oh yeah.
We get some characterization of Hal. There's some really cool moments. But yeah, I can totally understand you being like, screw this. But he also has these moments where, like, I think he kind of takes your breath away with what he observes. And I think Daniel Ostrov did a great job. Listen to that episode if you haven't, to the listener out there, because he does such a great, he said a lot of things that I would have said or would have liked to say. And I think he did a phenomenal job. You guys both did a phenomenal job on that episode.
Right.
But he talks about being a wandering eye. You know, David Foster Wallace is being like a wandering eye, and I think that's true. But, like, can I read a quote to you from David Foster Wallace?
Please, be my guest.
This is from an essay, and I think I think the better way to come to DFW is through his essays. I think he's a lot more readable. Mm-hmm. But he has this quote that I think is just so. He's talking about Kafka, and a lot of the things that he writes essays about, he's just a fan, like Mary Austin, who you talked about, or David Lynch. He's just a fan of David Lynch, you know. And he has a famous quote where he's like, David Lynch. Quentin Tarantino is interested in cutting off someone's ear. David Lynch is interested in the ear. Like, just like great moments like that. And he talks about Kafka in terms of, like, him being funny. And he says this great thing about it. It's not that students, when he's you know, he's a literature teacher, he's a writing teacher. It's not that students don't get Kafka's humor, but that we've taught them to see humor as something you get. The same way we've taught them that a self is something you just have. No wonder they cannot appreciate the really central Kafka joke, that the horrific struggle to establish a human self results in a self whose humanity is inseparable from that horrific struggle. That our endless and impossible journey toward home is in fact our home. It is hard to put into words up at the blackboard, believe me. You can tell them that maybe it's good they don't get Kafka. You can ask them to imagine his art as a kind of door, and this is really cool. To envision us readers coming up and pounding on this door, pounding and pounding, not just wanting admission, but needing it. We don't know what it is, but we can feel it, this total desperation to enter, pounding and pushing and kicking, etc., that finally the door opens, and it opens outward. We've been inside what we wanted all along. It's really cool. So he's got moments like that where just the beauty of what he's describing kind of takes your breath away, in my opinion. That being said, I can also see coming to that and being like, well, that's a pretentious load of BS. But I think it's funny because you look at Infinite Jest, you're like, look at this pretentious tome. But if you look at his career, it's really his attempt to get away from pretentiousness. And he almost can't help going back into it and being like, look at how smart I am, with like the description of the drugs in the footnotes. There's like, however many pages of drugs. And so you see a lot of like this, look how smart I am, and he can't get away from that. But the early part of his career is just like, I'm smarter than everybody else. Look at how smart my fiction is. With Infinite Jest, he's trying to do something more, I think. He's trying to write a book that speaks to the reader's imagination and challenges us to learn how to be better readers, and also learn and grow in the way that we do with other novels.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. No, everything's working. I was just double checking something there for a second. No. All right. I see what you're. I see what you're getting at. Again, I am not finding it in here just yet, but I'm hoping it comes to us.
And I'm not a big spoiler person, but I don't think it matters so much with this book.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that we're coming out of a stage where we realized that something has happened to Hal, right? Like something.
Right. We can tell that. We can tell that definitely from the first chapter and what we see of him later on. That there is something about Hal that he is not what he once was. We see that in the first chapter with, it seems like his family, CT in particular, in that admissions meeting, is trying to like cover up and like, get him through the gate without them asking any questions.
Right.
But it's very obvious something is very wrong with Hal, and we don't know what that is yet.
But throughout the rest of the book, and most of the plot takes place in that 1 month period. Most of the action of the book is like November, year of the Depend Adult Undergarment. Most of the action of the book takes place in that, and he is what he is at that point. But another way to look at this book is it follows like a Hamlet arc. I don't know if that's the right literary term for it, but have you read Hamlet? Are you familiar with Hamlet?
I'm familiar with Hamlet, and the overall crippling anxiety to decide anything.
Yeah, right. So that's Hal, right? He's kind of Hamlet. His uncle and his mom sort of have like a weird love affair. There's this.
I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
There's this understanding that Mario is kind of probably their love child. There's the dad's kind of mysterious death, and a lot of the book is his dad trying to find a way to communicate with him, which you saw in that one chapter that you did with Daniel last week.
Right, where he's masquerading as the conversational therapist. Well, right. The conversationalist.
Right, and then we get to. Do you want to get to the pages?
Yeah, let's get to that. So we're starting at page 33 in our edition. This is Year of the Depend Adult Undergarment, and the very first thing here is we're dealing with the medical attaché to Prince Q, the Saudi Minister of Home Entertainment. Is there anything you want to fill in here? I have a brief little thing I wrote up along with this.
Tell me what you think is happening.
Well,
so it's kind of like Netflix, like it's like a precursor to Netflix.
Oh, all right. As far as the film cartridges, yeah.
The interlace, like you can kind of it. I think Daniel pointed this out. It doesn't really matter what it looks like so much as just understanding, like
right, just understanding the concept that it's an overreaching. I looked at more as like an analog YouTube, like on YouTube.
Yeah,
you can get everything of any variety.
Yeah.
You can get an album, you can get an exercise thing, only instead of it just existing in the cloud, they're in individual cartridges.
Yeah.
So, but we have this with the medical attaché for, he's taking care of the prince's wife. Am I correct? Or
I don't remember. to be honest with you, and I don't know that it matters.
Well, I know. It says the prince only eats. This is the medical attaché talking what he knows about them. The prince only eats Toblerone on Wednesday. David Foster Wallace seems to have a thing for Toblerone. I've read a few of his things, and it comes up every time. He talks about it.
It sounds like a pinky out kind of candy, doesn't it? It
does a little bit,
Yeah.
I think Toblerone's like the pyramid-shaped one. It's like a long pyramid.
Yeah.
He says, but he eats that on Wednesday when his wife has Arab Women's Advanced League tennis night. Again, I write these notes as I'm reading, and a literal note I have in here is, suck my fucking dick, you first draft aggrandizing hack. This is a painful read for me. I'm trying to ends with
it's got to be torturous doing 1,100 pages, man, and a lot of them are footnotes that seem like they don't matter. It's got to be hard.
Right. So, all right. So we come back to this character at another point, the medical attaché to Prince Q and his wife. He is settling down, and he's watching a film cartridge, and when we revisit him a little later in this little section, it seems to be hinted that he has fallen prey to what will come to be known as the entertainment capital.
Yeah, so this book was almost called The Failed Entertainment. Mm-hmm. There's a bar have you heard of Hop Sings?
Yes.
They used to have a drink named The Failed Entertainment after this book. And I don't know what your spoiler.
I've already hinted that there is something that's gonna, just because again we're in the early chunks of a massive book where you kind of need to tease a little bit of what's coming. So
yeah,
how would you describe the entertainment as we should know it at this point in the book? Obviously, don't give away if there's anything about its maker or whoever. Just the general theme of what this plot device is.
So I'll say a couple things. I'll say, first of all, that there's a big theme that comes up here for me, which is this idea, which I could see myself doing. Like, you go to work all day, you work hard so that you have that little bit of time for entertainment at the end of the day. It's kind of like you work all week, and the end goal is that, like, sitting down in front of the TV or whatever your form of entertainment is. Like, it could be drugs, it could be drinking, it could be TV, it could be music.
Right.
So like
you're winding yourself up all day just to unwind at the end.
Correct. So like that's like the goal, is that's where you want to get to. And so there's this question of like, well, what else is there to life beyond that? Mm-hmm. And I think that comes up tangentially here. But so the entertainment, this film is supposed to be so enthralling that all you want to do is watch it forever. So the medical attaché is the first victim of the entertainment. He's watching it, and he just keeps putting it back on. So you see him, like, there's some pages where he's like crapping himself, and because he doesn't want to leave. All he wants to do is watch it. Doesn't care about anything else that's happening to him. And
it is entertained and captivated him enough that it has essentially just crippled him, mind, body, and spirit.
Correct.
Okay.
So like you can cut this out, and I would say spoiler alert here.
Okay.
The movie is Infinite Jest. It's called Infinite Jest.
Right. Okay. I knew that. I did.
So the entertainment is Infinite Jest. So like, there's the book Infinite Jest, but the movie is called Infinite Jest, and it was made by, and again, spoiler alert, Housefather.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a really important part of a couple of different of the kind of side plots.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I know that's something that's going to come to bear on everything else there. All right. Jumping ahead to the next little chapter, gotta admit, this one is pretty. I'm going to be pretty hard on old DFW here, because Year of the Trial Size Dove Bar, he just kind of puts on blackface for 2 pages, and
yeah, it's bad. It's my least favorite section of the book.
Okay, so just for the listener out there, again, this is David Foster Wallace, son of a philosophy professor and a literature professor himself, and this is what he has. I am not being racist. I am just reading this from the page.
Yeah, read it in your just read it. Yeah, go for it.
Reginald say Wardine say her mama ain't treat her right. Say her mama beat Wardine with a hanger. Say Wardine mama man Roy Tony be want to lie down with Wardine. Give Wardine candy and fives. So that for 3 pages. That's
It's terrible. It's my least favorite section of the book.
now. I got to admit, Ostrov kind of pardoned that for me a little bit by just saying that this is kind of the backstory for a character to come.
Who said that? Ostrov?
Ostrov, yeah. Which I'm not sure if that's Wardine who's going to show up.
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of main settings for the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. There's
and where we are right now, we've so far only really had the tennis academy. So that's all we've really hit so far.
There's the tennis academy, and then not far from the tennis academy, there's a which we're going to get to.
Mm-hmm.
There's a halfway house. So a good portion of the book takes place at the halfway house. So the character you saw in that little marijuana silly like story where he just orders so much pot and he's waiting for it to come.
Right.
That character, this character, Wardine, we're gonna find them at the halfway house.
Okay.
Not too far into the book. I mean, they're not huge characters, but we see these characters again.
Right, and I can appreciate that as like painting a broader scape of the people.
Yeah.
Like if we're going to meet these characters and he wants a backstory, but doesn't necessarily want to follow them down their own hall for that little thing. Yeah. This chapter also splits with a sudden story of a high school student named Bruce Green.
Yep.
Who has an interest in a fellow 8th grader named Mildred Bonk. That's a great name.
Right?
Mildred Bonk sounds like if your grandmother somehow found her way into prostitution and that was the best thing to come up with.
Well, it's kind of like one of those names where I think he describes her as being like super hot.
Well, the line I have here, which again, this is it reads bad to me. She was the kind of fatally pretty and nubile wraith-like figure who glides through the sweaty junior high corridors of every nocturnal emitter's dreamscape.
There you go.
That sounds like a Cradle of Filth lyrics, only without all the blood. So,
so we're also going to see them at the halfway house.
Oh yeah, we actually get a very quick epilogue for them out of nowhere. It says that Bruce Green and Mildred did end up together, but they were more or less like dropout white trash, had a kid by 20. So that's where we leave them until we find them again.
Yeah.
From here we come again to another year of the Depend adult undergarment. What is he trying to say with the name of the years?
So I think that I am I'm hesitant to spoil.
Okay, we don't have to then.
I'll just say, let me put it like this.
Okay.
There's a lot in the book about advertising and the future of advertising. So imagining the future of advertising, right? So like imagining what's possible with like a Netflix. How would you advertise when there's not commercials? Mm-hmm. So it comes into play later in the book, and you'll start to understand it a little bit more. But it has to do with advertising.
Okay. Again, this is just another one of those things that gives me pause, just because, like, okay, let me give you a good example. I love a lot of like prog rock, prog metal, like weird time signatures, big concept albums. But there is a thing in prog rock which people tend to turn against immediately, which is almost every prog rock band at one point will write a song with a story in it about a future where music is outlawed, man. And it's something that fans of the genre turn on so quickly because it is like first draft, first idea, like this shouldn't have gotten this far.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of 90s isms with this book and thinking very much reality bites. I could almost see that, like, what's next? They're going to have the honeycomb Cheerios, of the month kind of thing. Like, that is what it feels like. Just, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to take this with a grain of salt and hope it makes a greater point later on. And also just give the fairness that, for all I know, in the 90s, he was the first guy to make that observation and prediction. Just saying, from here in 2020, that seems a little,
No, I think that's a reasonable criticism.
Okay. But all right, we have Year of the Depend Adult Undergarment. A sleepover style conversation between Hal and his brother Mario. I have they discuss atheism.
Oh yeah, and there's the great joke in there. How do you describe a dyslexic, agnostic, insomniac?
Oh,
Someone who stays up all night torturing themselves over whether or not there is a
dog. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I think it's Kids in the Hall actually have a great sketch about that. Have you ever seen the one I'm talking about?
I don't think so.
Pretty much,
I know Kids in the Hall a little bit, but not super well.
It's the judges of like a dog breed contest, and you come and meet them as they're like really vexed and perplexed about what to do. Like, I don't know, read the submission again. Let's just check. And he reads it out loud, like, I would like to enter into the contest, my God Spot. And they take it super seriously, like, is this really a deity that's being entered? And of course it ends with, it was an actual god, and everybody is sacrificed at the end of it. But
that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think Dan touched on this, but Mario is one of the most, probably the most likable character in the book.
Right, that he's like, a pretty decent guy overall.
Yeah, and he
now,
just like,
if I understand, his role at Enfield is he's like one of the videographers.
Yeah, he's like pretty good at filming stuff. Okay. So like his father sort of showed him the ropes and brought him around. And he helped his father, who was like this really, really pretty good filmographer.
Right. I can just see that in reading the footnotes that we're getting pretty close to his filmography that kind of details.
It's funny. His filmography, there's a lot of funny and interesting moments in there. And it sort of is parallel to David Foster Wallace in this, like, let me show you how smart and brilliant I am. Mm-hmm. And then, like, let me try to do something of value. Like, so like it sort of comes into that.
Okay. Again, when I was talking with you about setting this podcast up, I remember you saying to me, like, what if you end up liking it? To which I would be the best arc of this entire thing. And I love people and artists who swing big. So if he gets me by the end of this, I will be amazed and very happy with this experiment.
So here's what I kind of predict. I don't predict that. I'm not going to predict either way whether or not you're going to like it. Mm-hmm. My assumption is that you're going to get to the end and be like, I could have done without that. But I think there are going to be moments where you're like, wow, that really took my breath away.
Okay.
And it's for me, like, those moments are worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, I saw a pretty good line here that one of them talking on atheism saying, I'll say God seems to have a kind of laid-back management style I'm not crazy about. Like, okay, that's I like little observations like that, little Tom Waitsy, God's away on business type thing. In this little mini chapter, they first hint on the fact that himself, the father, James, right? Yeah. He is no longer around, and that the moms did not seem to mourn him too much. That would fall into the Hamlet thing, I think, that you were saying.
Yeah. There's also a really, I forget exactly what it is, or if they just hinted it. Oren is sort of separate, and we'll get to Oren in a second. But he's sort of separate from the family, and there's this weird, like, you get the sense that something happened with Oren and the moms, too.
Mm-hmm.
And they call him himself, and they call her the moms because she can be like multiple places at once.
Right.
So it's like, or it seems like she's everywhere at once. So there's more than one of her.
Right. And the himself was kind of showing his level of prestige in the family, as in the man himself.
Yeah, like I think it's just like it was an inside joke between Oren and Hal, and then Mario kind of tries to join in, and he does, and if Hal loves anyone in the book, it's Mario. Like he loves Mario kind of unconditionally.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to more from Mario. Okay, that chapter ends talking about the medical attaché is still watching the unlabeled entertainment cartridge.
Yep.
And then from there, we get into October, Year of the Dependent Adult Undergarment, and now we get a full little chapter starring our good friend Oren Incandenza. Remind me, where is he in the birth order? Is he the oldest of the three?
He's the oldest.
All right, so it's Oren, Mario,
Correct.
I don't know why I said Hale for a second. But so go ahead.
No, so just another thing that you're going to find obnoxious that I didn't know if you would figure this out or if you would hear this from anybody else, but the book is supposed to be structured, or at least he tried to structure it in the same format as a fractal.
Yeah, that infuriates me, and I don't I don't understand it, and it makes me angry. But
yeah.
So maybe you could explain that a little bit. What was the specific thing? Like the circuit is some like Serbian sounding name, the Serbsky triangle or something.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
But what exactly does that mean? Trying to organize a novel by fractals?
Well, I know he's like a math guy, and I know that like that's like it's another obnoxious kind of intellectualism of it, that like you could come to it and see it from that perspective, that it's supposed to be like a beautiful structure or something. I don't know.
Like I know Tool has done that with music, where they tried to write a song with the time signatures of like the Fibonacci sequence ratios.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely cool to look at. So, but all right. So, Oren, what we have here is
you said Tool did that.
Tool did that with one of their albums. I think it's on Lateralis. But Oren is a punter in the NFL for the Arizona Cardinals, and when we meet him here, he is in Arizona. Apparently, he's a very, very good one. He was traded for a lot of other players and cash.
The story of how he became a punter is really interesting and cool.
Okay, well, they hint that he has a physical disparity. Now, I wasn't aware whether this was as a result of his punting or what led to him becoming a punter, but it seems to say that his appendages on one side dwarf the other side.
Yeah, so he just works out his one leg because he punts with the one leg. That's all that means.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a reasonable question.
Okay.
But you also see him kind of obnoxiously referring to women as subjects, and the only women that he kind of sleeps with are women who have kids, like they're like divorced or like they're married, like just like single mothers. That's the only kind of woman that he tends to go for.
Sounds like a good strategy to me.
Well, there's this weird, like, he's got all these strategies for how to meet women that are really funny and super involved, and it's just really sad. You know, he's really broken.
Mm.
And to repeat what Dan said, but something happened with him and the moms.
Okay.
That has caused him to kind of want to separate from the family.
Okay, and he seems to, out of the boys, he definitely seems to be the most independent, young sports star.
Yeah.
But he's also the oldest. The other, at least Hal, we see he's still in the academy, so he wouldn't really be in a place. Mentioned something about how the moms had a historic fear of germs and being unhygienic.
Yeah.
And although Oren hasn't inherited these traits, the closest he has is he does hate roaches. And he stomped one once in the shower, of which was so revolting that he never quite cleaned up the spatter from it and threw out the shoes rather than cleaning the roach guts off of them. That's just, dude. If you're a millionaire punter, that's just what you do, right?
And
But
so what he does is
no
he
shoes for
takes
free. Oh yeah, his torture chambers. Tell us all about them. I like that.
yeah. So he just takes like like a mason jar type thing and puts it over the roach and kind of watches it suffocate and die instead of splattering it. Because they just tend to be everywhere.
Yeah, the detail they have here is he has so many overturned glasses on his floor with roaches asphyxiating in them that he has difficulty walking around the apartment without knocking them over.
It's pretty funny. Yeah.
I have a line here I thought interesting from Oren. The worst mornings with cold floors and hot windows and merciless light. The sole certainty that the day will have to be not traversed but sort of climbed.
Yeah.
And then going to sleep again at the end of it will be like falling again off something tall and sheer, which does sound very much related to where we are with the film cartridges of just, going through that huge slog of life. What exactly is it for? What is the reward at the end, but to fall off the end and begin in the new?
Yeah, and his kind of like the thing that drives him kind of tends to be like those subjects. It seems like that's what he's like addicted to is the women and figuring out ways to manipulate them.
Nice. Have a little note here, says that himself also ran away as an unhappy youngster to the Southwest. That's where Oren is now.
Yeah, there's a great portion of this is just himself's father. Like it'll say 1964 or something.
I'm waiting for that soliloquy. I've already had a person I reached out to be on this episode specifically request that segment so he can talk about that.
Yeah, there's it's a really cool section. But yeah, so like he didn't have a great childhood or the happiest of childhoods. So himself is kind of this prodigy in several different areas, first in tennis and then later in other things. Like film is like the last thing that he's like really good at. So there's this another theme in the book is like, let's say you reach the goal of what you want it to get to, right? Like you want it to get published. Okay. You want it to make the NFL. You want it to be the best director. Let's say you got there and what now? So like, what happens once you reach that summit? Like, is that an end in itself? Like, is there happiness there? Or have you maybe missed part of the point? So there's that question that we see with himself, who is wildly successful, but also wildly unhappy.
Right.
And same thing with Oren, wildly successful, but extremely unhappy and broken.
Yeah, no, that's one of those things I can identify with, and I think is definitely a lesson not enough people get. Strangely enough, well, not strangely enough, the reason most people don't get it is I feel like most people never really hit that pinnacle of success. Yeah. It's easy enough to dream about it, like, oh, one day I'll reach this major plateau. The problem being, like, once you win that championship, guess what? You need to defend it all the fucking time. What you're really striving for is to be under even more pressure. Once you've obtained it, you have to maintain it, which is 100 times harder.
Sure. So there's that question that's kind of struggled with throughout this book of like, what is success? What does success look like? To put it simply, I guess. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So we got a footnote here, number 2. Oren is going to tell us about some of his dreams, and the footnote tells us that Oren has never gone to a therapist. So these analyses of his dreams are entirely his own interpretation.
Yeah, he's pretty surface level. Like, there's a lot that you can, as a reader, read into that he doesn't really realize.
Right.
So there's a lot of that with Oren where it's like you can see it, but he can't necessarily.
Okay. So they have here from the book, he dreams of playing tennis matches with his mother's face strapped tight to his own. Quote, as if the mom's head was some sort of overtight helmet Oren can't wrestle his way out of. And during one of his one-night stands with a subject while sleeping, a subject complained that he had tried grabbing and removing her head like a helmet in his sleep. Says in his sleep the decapitation was more clean with no stump, as if his mother's head was made of ball resting on her shoulders. That was actually a nice visual. I've had weird-ass dreams like that, actually. You ever have that? You're having like a violent dream and then you strike somebody and their head just pops off like a Lego top? No?
Usually it's me that gets hurt, and when I'm kicking or something and I kick the wall, that's usually what happens for me.
I get those frequent ones where like somebody is really threatening you in a dream and you go to punch them and it's just like the weakest punch you could have ever thrown. I feel like everybody has those at some point. Or I wonder if MMA guys or boxers get those, or like if they're confident enough that even in dreams they still just beat the shit out of people.
I would love to know. I would love to be on that end of it.
What are Mike Tyson's nightmares of? I think that's a podcast in and of itself. We gotta find that out.
Tyson's nightmares?
Tyson's nightmares. That's right.
That would be a great podcast.
His pigeons leave him all alone.
Imagine David Foster Wallace trying to do the voice of Mike Tyson, like trying to write out in text in Infinite Jest, trying to make a character that's based on Mike Tyson. It would just be like the most racist blackface thing ever you could think of. It's why like you can't do like, because you said blackface, like black voice is a thing too. It's like it's just a hard thing to do well. Like, and he does not nail it at all.
No. You know what was funny? I was surprised he never got in trouble for it. On Chris Titus's podcast, he had 4 years where he just had like a character he talked to on the show it was just black voice, but he used some specific filter that it actually sounded like a different guy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then he just dropped him one day, like maybe along the lines of like, this is probably going to catch up with me. That's not a good thing.
I also think things being funny sort of tend to justify themselves.
Agree.
So if it's whatever. So like if it's funny, it's like, okay, cool. You can say whatever you want. You know, like Anthony Jeselnik can kind of say whatever he wants because it's funny for the most part, or a lot of it is. So if it's funny, it's like it doesn't necessarily matter how offensive it is to some extent.
Yeah, I know. There's the whole concept of punching, which, you know, jokes aren't punches, but the punching up versus punching down, to which I say, like, well, doing a silly, over the top, exaggerated voice in who is receiving that blow, you know?
Yeah, correct.
So I have here, Oren says that a subject recently put on a film cartridge while he pretended to sleep on schizophrenia. He will be doing a profile for Moment Magazine, including research and interview done with him, Oren, and on his background.
So that's another somewhat major character who's going to come and do the interview.
Okay, yeah, that seemed to be hinting at something to come.
Oren's ex-wife is also, she's probably the third biggest character in the book.
Oh, is that Hallie?
That is, so Hal is Hallie.
Oh, okay. I have a note here that said the quote was the unexamined stress of which drives him to start calling Hallie again, reopen that whole Pandora's box of worms. So
yeah, so he'll call Hal.
Okay.
He'll call Hal, and there'll just be these chapters and footnotes that are just conversations between them, and they kind of pick at each other the way brothers do. It's kind of funny, but there's another I would say that's the third major character in the book. The third major storyline is his ex-wife, who you're gonna meet soon. Okay.
We're on to the next chapter again. You're the dependent old undergarment, and this is where we have Hal Incandenza is smoking marijuana out of a one-hitter in a secluded place amongst the ventilation equipment known as the Lung at the Enfield Tennis Academy. all of which is explained ad infinitum. Not only the makings of one-hitters, why brass one-hitters are not probably the best, and all that shit. We also get a lot of footnotes. Anything in particular you want to hit on here? Because I know we have a lot. There's a lot that he just threw into this chapter.
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things. One is we see here how described as like not necessarily. So he is addicted to pot, but more so it says he's addicted to the secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a cool quote about like he knows way more about it than he does about why he's obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. And how that seems to like plague his generation. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea that he knows more about like pot itself than he does about why he's doing it. Like he doesn't understand why he's doing it. He's just doing it.
Right.
And so I think that was a cool reflection. But yeah, I think that we see, they call it the lung, I guess. Right. So this area kind of underneath the courts, or surrounding the courts, and we see some action in the book taking place in this part. Okay. He just loves hiding this from his mom. Like he loves hiding it from his mom and his Uncle Charles, who is the president of the tennis academy, whatever it is. He's in charge.
Right. It says that Grandpa James and CT were both former administrators at his Enfield Tennis Academy.
Tavis he's the main administrator. Okay. I think Incandenza used to be like the headmaster. I think now it's Tavis. So there's that again that Hamletian arc of the uncle coming in, or
there's Hamletian. I've never heard that use of it, but I like Hamletian.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's
it is from now on. I decree it. Hamletian.
It's pretentious enough to fit with the conversation.
There's several lines here that I like a lot where he talks about how the school, despite having a very strict drug policy, doesn't enforce it that much.
Yeah.
Not out of any like, oh, we don't care, or like rich parents, but the quote I have here is they operate under the belief of, who would want to compromise their faculties chemically even come here to ETA, where the whole point is to stress and stretch your faculties along multiple vectors. With the footnote that I thought was actually a great line, that these academy higher-ups, the idea that all prestigious academy operate under the false notion that all applicants are there because they want to be, considering it an impossibility that it could possibly be their parents who are former tennis players who are really just on their asses about this.
Yeah. And it is, so, I mean, the coach is this, like, German, like, super strict guy. Stitt, I think is his name. Mm-hmm. And so you get the sense, like, it's not an easy thing physically to be there. But it's also an academically grueling school. Like, I think the mom's the one in charge of the curriculum. So it's also, both intellectually and physically just draining.
Right. And they mentioned that it is very, very hard. He talks about the pro-rectors who are advisors, both academic and athletic. He has here that they're all pretty much miserable. They fall into the old thing of they were former students there, couldn't hack it in tennis, and now have to return to instruct because it's really the only thing. Like, if you can't cut the mustard in competition, that's the only thing your skill level qualifies you for, is teaching at the place where you learned you'd never make it.
Yeah, they're not. Some of them, they go out and play tournaments. They're not quite good enough to be pro. They're really good. They're just, they're at that level where, and a lot of the, and I think this is another cool thing that it brings up is this idea of being like really, really good at something, but not good enough to be the best, Right. So like you have a lot of, and maybe it's luck, but in a lot of cases, just like, okay, you're really good at this thing, but like your ability only takes you to a point where you're really good at it. you can't get to a point where you're on the pro tour. You know?
Right. And you only really find that out at a place like a prestigious academy, because more than likely in your own little fishbowl, like as a child and a teenager, you've been, big fish in a small pond. It's only when you're thrown in with the other elites that you even get that humbling to find out where you really, like, yeah, okay, you're better than everyone else. Where do you rank amongst the greats? Like, a lot of people are going in for a big disappointment.
The other thing that coincides with Hal smoking is this incredible rise in rank in terms of like national rank. Like I think they're the guy who's the best player in the country. He's neither number one or number two is also at Enfield, John Wayne, and Hal is like in the top 10. Like he's in the top 10 in the country by the time like we meet him in this book. And that's attributed to, it comes at the same time as his smoking pot. So like it's like the two are linked somehow that we don't really understand.
Do we understand eventually, or do we just not understand at this point?
I don't know. I mean, I don't remember ever having an idea, but I know that like it's part of like the pressure cooker that he's trying to build with Hal. And like in terms of like there's a lot going into what there's a lot going on for Hal, and he's not necessarily making a decision one way or the other. He's just doing what other people are telling him to do. And it sort of creates this like pressure cooker inside of him that hits a climax or a breaking point.
Okay. The end of that chapter, we just have a brief thing about Mario we already discussed, and the prince's wife is back, and we don't get her reaction, but it seems to indicate that she is discovering the attaché watching the entertainment. So we'll probably get back to that.
So I think she also starts watching it, and then she becomes transfixed too.
Oh, okay.
And like, I think there's this series of like people who come to see what's wrong, and then like they start watching too. So like, I don't know if it's with him or with someone else, but I think it's with him where that happens, where there's just like you see the lethality of this.
Okay, I'm looking forward to more details on this. He's setting up some layers.
Yeah, I feel like I'm giving some spoilers, and I don't think that it matters that much what I'm spoiling, but I'm sorry if I am, because I don't think I've done anything major.
So, all right, we have our last chapter for this autumn, year of dairy products from the American heartland, and we get to meet a character who will loom over some more of the book, Don Gately.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, I'm liking him so far. Again, Ostrov said that the first time he met Shane Gillis, he immediately thought of him as Don Gately, and that's exactly how I'm picturing him reading. Pretty great. Just a large, oafish man.
He's got like so in the book he's described as having like a big square head.
Right.
And he's also like pretty jacked, I guess. In the book, like he
seems like a big refrigerator of a guy.
Yeah. And he is, so it's funny because when I first read this book, I'm a person who is in recovery from alcoholism. So this book sort of has, and I have 2 years. So I never read this book, in recovery, but I think a lot of it spoke to a part of me that I didn't necessarily always realize was a problem, which is that like addiction and things like that.
Right.
And Gately is an addict, right? Like he is a drug addict who, identifies as an alcoholic because he wants to do AA. But the first portion where we see him is him getting himself into some really big trouble.
Right. Yeah. It hints here. Wallace starts off with just the notion of saying that drug addicts who resort to crime tend to stray pretty far from violent crime as opposed to burglary. Really, their crime is only based around how much it affords them access to their addiction.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
What'd you
I thought
think?
that was good. I thought that. Well, I thought that was definitely interesting and fair. A good point. That would be something I would like to point out to my very very Republican uncles whenever they talk about crime. It's a these guys they always imagine somebody breaking into their house that they can shoot down, and that's like as much of a personality as they ever imagine in that person.
Yeah, I work at a drug and alcohol rehab facility now,
Ah,
and so not too dissimilar from Don Gately, who is like he watches over a house. But like I don't know if you've had any experience with like working with people in addiction or
I
whatever, but
pretty much
yeah,
many members of my family, the majority of my family, are either current or recovering addicts of one stripe or another.
yeah, and I think everyone in Philadelphia has the experience knowing someone or knowing someone who knows someone who's had an experience with heroin, and like I don't know, it to me it's spot on. Like they're not trying to be violent. They don't want to go to jail. They're just trying to finance their habit,
Right.
which isn't again like judge it if you want. That's fine, but they're not trying to hurt anyone. They're just trying
Yeah.
to get theirs.
Yeah. Now I have my own personal feelings about that, which is let's just say I have a very close relative that got into heroin, and I learned some unique thing. Like this person has since kicked the habit, but despite being very close to me relationally, we have very little of a relationship now. And I think part of that is just, and this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, like there was a point where she was missing for a bit, and I was literally like calling the local morgues looking for a Jane Doe.
Yeah.
And I feel horrible saying it, but like the truth is, like, when you've already had to protect your psyche enough to be like, oh, well, I'm going to get a call one day that she's dead. When that person recovers, it's kind of hard to bounce back from that. When you've already like kind of accepted them as half dead for years anyway, and then suddenly they're back to normal. Addiction's bad for everyone.
Oh yeah, and I think that's why part of the recovery process is doing amends, um, and trying to restore some kind of relationship as much as possible. But yeah, it's wild. Like I mean, yeah, and a lot of this book is about that. A lot of this book is about addiction and people battling with it.
And Wallace himself was a recovering addict from alcohol, and I believe he said marijuana as well, or at least admitted to marijuana.
Yeah, and so like there's also like the metaphor of addiction for entertainment,
True.
as well.
Again, what are we ultimately chasing at the end of the day? So
correct. Yeah.
So if we could just run through this real quick. So Gately, again, we have this description of drug addicts typically don't resort to violence, and Gately accidentally finds his way to it here. It's mentioned that he is very much a revenge person after being locked up for 3 months by an assistant DA in Boston. He and an accomplice, who was a character named Trent Quovadi Kite, who I assume is going to show up later with the Quebecois. They broke into the home of the assistant district attorney months later and only like did minor disturbance, like just enough to let people know they were there. Didn't really steal much. After several months, of everybody being weird and then calming down inside the house, the assistant DA received a letter in the mail of Gately and Kite in clown masks with the ADA's family's toothbrushes sticking out of their buttholes. Presumably left behind for them to unwittingly brush their teeth with.
It's pretty funny.
Pretty great.
So yeah, there's levels to this. Like you see, Gately gets himself in like serious trouble right before he goes into right before he goes into kind of rehab.
Is that what we're about to get here with the elderly Quebecois man?
Yeah. So and then that's another thing. Like there's the Quebecois separatists.
Right. All right. Well, hold on. Let me just read that summary real quick of what happens to that man, and then we can discuss. Because after that, we're done with my notes.
Yeah.
So he later does another home invasion of a elderly Quebecois man. Him and the other man enter believing the whole family to be absent. This old man actually has a terrible sinus infection and has stayed home. And unfortunately, he yells out to him in Quebecois French, but Gately doesn't understand that, oh, take the money, take this, etc., etc. Well, Gately gags the man, ties him up to keep him quiet, unaware of the incredible sinus infection. And this poor old man with no airway in his nose slowly suffocates to death through this, what's meant to be a, just a non-violent restraint, essentially death by stuffy nose.
Yeah, so Gately has kind of put himself into this bind where there's the ADA, right, who now despises him and wants to put him away and wants to just, he's made an enemy of a really powerful person in local law enforcement, in a assistant district attorney. But then there's also this Quebecois man who, we'll find out is a big player in this terrorist group. So he's really powerful as well. So now Gately has screwed over someone in law enforcement. And he's also screwed over someone who is a really powerful terrorist. So he's sort of caught between a rock and a hard place when we meet him again. And I don't know that he even realizes
where do you hide when you've made yourself a major enemy of both the law and the crime world?
Correct. And so I don't know that he even realizes it. I don't remember exactly. But I know that he's got that, he's got these things kind of hanging over his head of he's made some really powerful enemies. And so when we kind of get to him and get to his story, he's got a little bit more than a year sober and clean. And he's different, he's changed, but he's also worried about going back to that old self, that old addict self.
Okay, well, Mr. Clark, I think we have wrapped up our little section here, pages 33 to 60.
I'm really glad you had me on here. I'm sorry if I spoiled anything.
No, that's fine. I would like to have you on again when we're a little further along and you can expound more without really worrying about letting out too much.
Yeah, I'll let you know, there's a portion of the book that I really like that if I can request a section.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to do.
I can tell from you holding up the book that we're reading from the same printing. So,
yeah.
you're big old blue and lime green.
There's a foreword from Eggers in the beginning, which is interesting, which is just about the challenge of is it worth it to read challenging fiction? And so is Infinite Jest worth it? And it makes an argument for it that says it is. So yeah, it's I like this edition. It's the only one I want to read from. I don't like the new one. Yeah, this is what I know.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to the challenge. Again, if nothing else, I'm very glad that I'm doing this podcast just because it means I'm going to get through this.
Yeah, I don't you just love just having an extended conversation about a book,
Oh yeah, well, not only that, but I mean the sheer fact that because I'm having to summarize it and record episodes about it, I'm going to be reading it at such a slow pace that it kind of removes. I mean, I'm still frustrated with some of it just because it's a style I'm really not used to or a fan of, but it's allowing for frustration while preventing frustrative burnout, which I think is what stopped me in my tracks the first time I tried to read this, and I got 400 pages in.
I see. So, and that in itself is pretty impressive that you got that far. Most people do not. Most people give up.
I'm stubborn.
They hit a certain point where they're okay, it's enough, David Foster Wallace, which I can totally understand. I can totally understand giving up after 400 pages. I would understand.
Next time we talk, we should discuss the article you sent me, E Unum Pluribum. I read some of it today. I just hadn't realized when I asked her it was 44 pages.
Yeah, it's long. So it's just a really interesting take on fiction at the time, and it's kind of gives you a theoretical backdrop for.
Right. It's applicable to what he's trying to do with this book.
Correct.
Irony and yeah.
And it's what do you? So he's sort of trying to do something that goes beyond irony. He doesn't want to be ironic. You know, he can't help it, but he thinks like the trap of modern society is like TV, he thinks, has gotten really good at making fun of itself.
Right.
So like you can't criticize it because it can criticize itself better than like The Simpsons can make fun of itself better than you can make fun of it. But if that's the only,
it made me immediately think of when the Daily Show was becoming like a big source of journalism, but then whenever it was criticized, would hide behind like, oh, but it's a comedy show, like
correct, yeah,
like not really acknowledging like, no, you've kind of taken on a different level than that.
yeah. So it's that's a really interesting point. It is like that. But it's sort of like it's coming for this idea of like postmodernism is saying that like just being smart and clever and breaking down the novel and making you aware that you're watching a story or that you're reading a story is an end in itself. And he's saying, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's what fiction is meant to do. And he really goes hard after some authors like Bret Easton Ellis
Okay.
and a couple other guys who he thinks just they're disingenuous to the American people and what they're trying to do with their fiction. He wants to give people hope, and I think he's trying to do that to some extent with this book.
Okay. Well, shit, giving us another reason to get through to another chapter and another episode of the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast.
Who's next?
Next, I'm doing an experimental one. I'm having on Katu King because her discussing this is a big part of it. Her discussing this on her Facebook during quarantine was where I finally got into like, I really should get on top of that and do that fucking podcast already.
She's great.
Oh, she's great. Yeah. I'm having trouble finding a lot of guests just because I'm specifically trying to get performers, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. I'm going to try to get McCusker, although God knows if that's even possible. I know he's a big fan of the book, so, maybe he'll feel froggy and
he loves talking books.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a big DeLillo guy. I'll shoot him. I'll text them every so often about books, and we just talk about what we're reading. It's pretty cool. I'm sure he would at least like to chat a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You know what's actually really funny? I haven't promoted this podcast at all yet because I wanted to, I wanted to get a few episodes ready before really, and not to mention like Apple only like approved it a few days ago for iTunes.
Yeah.
But randomly, I was on the Matt and Shane subreddit, and somebody just brought up Infinite Jest out of nowhere, and I figured, like, all right, fuck it. I guess I might as well post it here. I got 50 downloads just off of one post in, like, a subreddit thread.
That's wild.
Yeah, so it's the dogs out there are thirsty for knowledge. So
yeah, it's a great. It's like a bro-y kind of book to some extent, even though like an intellectual bro-y kind of book.
See, I intend to promote it on. There's a whole subreddit just for David Foster Wallace and Infinite Jest. I kind of want to throw it out there where it's weird as a fandom. As a fandom, it's really strange to see people go like, I absolutely love this thing. I understand why a lot of people hate it. Usually people are more like blind in their how much they're really trying to be fanatics of something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different. It's definitely different. I think there are those like Bernie Bro type fanatics for this book.
I've heard a lot of Bernie Bro comparisons.
Another thing that's interesting that I'll say for this book is you get like the character. I also love Vonnegut. I heard you talking about Vonnegut.
Love Vonnegut.
There's the character, what's his name? I guess James, is that the father, who spends like a decent portion of his film career just trying to make a film for Hal.
Mm.
And like he wants to make something to speak to Hal. And he's trying to communicate with Hal. And Kurt Vonnegut has this philosophy in his writing where he says like you should only write for one person. Mm. So for him, he wrote for his sister.
Allie,
And I think when his sister died, that's when he sort of lost inspiration. He's like, I don't like have a literal person to write for anymore. Mm-hmm. So like he kind of just ran out of stuff to write. So I think that there's that interesting idea that's happening here too, which is like a character trying to speak to one person. And I don't think David Foster Wallace is doing that so much, but I think it's definitely a major arc in the book.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely a noble attempt. I mean, well, for one thing, you're always going to get a more unique, sincere voice trying to write to one as opposed to trying to appeal to all.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, good. Let's wrap it up. Let's just do our goodbyes real quick. I'll hit stop on record, and then you and I can keep chatting a little bit. But yeah, Steve Clark, thank you very much for coming on the show. We will we'll see you again. Let me know what section you really wanted to talk about, and we'll bring you back on for it.
Cool. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to me.
No problem. Again, we wouldn't be here if not for me arguing with you. So
I love it. Great.
All right. We'll see you next time.